Hello, I'm Nathaniel Evans from the University of Georgia.
And I'm Delia Balaban from Babeș University, Cluj-Napoca, Romania.
And together with our colleagues, we want to present today our research titled How the Impact of Social Media Influencer Disclosures Changes Over Time. So there are specific questions we want to ask in this research. The first and probably most important were what the short and long-term effects are of a single versus multiple exposure paradigm to social media influencer content. In particular, we are concerned with how that difference in exposure level impacts behaviors, specifically purchase intent and attitudes towards the brand. And also what the difference in exposure level is for skepticism over time. And with these insights, we hope to provide managers with implications for social media influencer content in today's largely dynamic media environment. Most studies that investigate social media influencers derive results that use a one stimuli, one exposure design. And this is problematic in that it probably does not reflect adequately consumers' media experiences. And so we were interested in examining the potential effects of repeated exposures to social media influencer advertising, as well as disclosures over time. And this has not been investigated, which really identifies the research gap. And so specifically, we want to focus on the effects of multiple disclosures and disclosure presence on an initial mediator of skepticism and how that in turn impacts attitudinal and behavioral outcomes. We bring to the table two important theoretical constructs, the first of which is the persuasion knowledge model. And in the persuasion knowledge model, there are two main components, one of which is the conceptual component, which relates to individuals' recognition that the content they're exposed to is advertising. And the second component is largely what we would consider evaluative. Here we have a measure of skepticism, which is what we define as the tendency toward disbelief of sponsored content. And we incorporated this particular construct of persuasion knowledge in our model because we believe that skepticism can negatively affect consumers' attitudes towards the promoted brand. The second major theoretical construct we bring to the table is the sleeper effect. While it's largely been used in political advertising, we believe it's appropriate for this content because, largely speaking, it accounts for how initial negative attitudes can change and improve over time. And so negative attitudes are thought to be initially affected by a discounting cue, and a discounting cue is a piece of information that refutes or discredits a persuasive message. And the sleeper effect posits that over time, that initial negative attitude that was affected by a discounting cue will become less prominent, and therefore attitudes will become more positive. And we believe, based on existing research, that disclosures in this case can be considered a discounting cue. And here's our conceptual model. First and foremost, we believe that our two independent variables of sponsorship disclosure and number of exposures are thought to initially impact consumers' skepticism, which in turn impacts their subsequent brand attitude and purchase intention. Now, the other important component we bring in this conceptual model is the moderating factor of time and how time might have an impact on resulting brand attitude and purchase intention.
So to test our hypothesis model, we apply an online experiment with different exposure levels. Our participants were 195 women ages 15 to 37 from Romania. And our experiment had three phases. First of all, we assigned the participants to exposure level condition. So some of the participants saw the content generated by our fictitious influencer only once, and the other group saw the content generated by our fictitious influencer 4 times in a row. That happens during 2 weeks. After that 4 time exposure to the influencer content, the participants were applied an online survey. So the first measurement were done. As for the other group, we had only single exposure to the influencer content. 3 times they were exposed to different content from social media accounts that were somehow related to lifestyle and travel, which is basically the content also produced by our fictitious social media influencers. Also, in our fourth exposure, we had one group that saw advertising generated by our social media influencer with ad disclosure and without ad disclosure, the other group. So we had not only one measurement after the end of this fourth time exposure or single exposure, but we also conducted an additional measurement, a second post-test assessing brand attitude and purchase intentions as dependent variables 4 weeks after our first measurement, 4 weeks after our last exposure.
So I want to discuss our short and long-term findings separately. Our first finding indicates that there is an effect of both disclosure and multiple exposures on skepticism, but this is nuanced. Contrary to what we predicted, disclosure alone didn't actually increase consumer skepticism. However, disclosure in conjunction with multiple exposures were actually quite impactful on increasing skepticism. Our long-term effects paint a different picture, and we like to consider this as a healing effect of time. So for example, if you look at the chart, you can see using the gray line that at our initial data collection point, our time 1, skepticism, higher levels of skepticism, in fact, were impacting negatively brand attitudes. However, you see that at a second data collection point, brand attitudes actually improved for those who reported a very high degree of skepticism. So this indicates a sleeper effect for brand attitude. Secondly, you can see here on the chart, this effect was also very similar with purchase intention. As you can see, the gray line, those who had a high initial reported skepticism reported the most negative purchase intention at time 1. However, this changed at the second data collection point, and you can see the most improvement in purchase intention among those who reported the highest initial skepticism. In terms of our implications, this is one of the first studies that has addressed and used the sleeper effect in the context of social media influencer advertising. This positions the dissociation hypothesis as a valuable component in explaining longer-term effects, or even more specifically, why consumers might respond negatively initially to an influencer campaign, and how that might change over time. In terms of guidance for social media influencers, we suggest that they consider alternating branded and non-branded content. This might be an appropriate use of integration of influencer marketing campaigns. And third, we believe that our long-term effects prove that even for really highly skeptical viewers, a significant time delay may actually help the initial negative effects, and we might see benefits over time. Thank you.